Why, hello there, Exile. Today we're going to be taking a look at Wave of Conviction League Starter. What we're going to go over is this gear here, where I hope to be at this point at the end of day one. This is under 100C. I don't know what it'll exactly be because of the uniques, and that can vary. I don't know how the league's going to shake that up, but none of the uniques are really even mandatory for this build. Now, the nice thing about the build is there's a ton of damage to be had and a ton of little adjustments that you can make. So after we finish talking about the build and showcasing it here on two maps, we're going to go over a couple ways that you can increase the damage on the build, and then we're going to talk about upgrades, and then we're going to go over leveling this darn thing. But this is on a 5-link and nothing too crazy gear-wise, like I said, and it took that boss down fine. But that's a boss that doesn't have phases. So in the next map, what I'm going to be doing is doing a graveyard. Very annoying boss because you got to kill them over and over and over so that you could see the sustained damage of the build and how it plays in those sorts of situations. I think that's an important thing to look at. But that map there that we just did took us about 1 minute and 10 seconds to fully clear it. And if we would have just left the boss, it would have been half that if we're like going for a Atlas node only. So this is Graveyard. Graveyard unfortunately has tons of trees and stuff like that. That is gonna be pretty annoying, but we are doing pretty good here clearing as well. It's once you have the Profane Bloom explosion from Obliteration Wand, and once you have some form of Ignite Proliferation, it does a pretty good job of casting one Wave of Conviction and cleaning up just about the entire screen. Now, I only have 20% increased AoE. In my endgame version, I had way more than that, and I recommend investing in that, especially if you want to farm something like Legion. So we have the first wave down there because we had our Vol skill up, but now we have to get it back, and it's already up. So you can see that we're going to get multiple Vol skills just by damaging things, and it's not too bad to use the Vol Flame Blast multiple times on bosses. See, it's up one more time here. And we're clearing. I do not have my second curse yet. I do not have Herald of Ashen, and I do not have Malevolence in, which will have that as a temporary aura, and we'll talk about that in a second of how we can add those things. Additionally, you can always add in a weapon swap because Flame Blast isn't affected at all by Obliteration Wand for the base damage. So you can get +1 fire skills with some damage, fire damage over time multiplier, something like that, or dual wield those. Weapon swap, do way more damage so that you can just instantly delete the bosses. Also, we don't know from the League mechanic, there might be the Obliteration Wand explosion, so we could just run around with a scepter and do way more base damage and not even have to weapon swap ever, which would be really cool. And I'm hoping that's in there for a super rare one, but we don't know because GGG likes to hide all this stuff, so it is what it is there. Let's talk about the gems that we're using and then the playstyle of the build. For auras, we're using Determination and Grace and Vitality. We're using Molten Shell with cast on damage taken for our guard skill, although this did get nerfed, so it's not as strong. We're using Flame Dash to jump over cliffs because Shield Charge can't do that. And we're using Shield Charge, Life Tap, so this is on my life. Otherwise, I'm going to have mana issues, faster attacks, which makes me move quicker. And then Elemental Weakness. Now I paired this with Life Tap because this base cost is 33, and it's pretty annoying to deal with as well. So I'd rather have it on life if I'm going to use mana as my primary resource. Then we have Flame Blast, Combustion, Burning Damage, and Cruelty. Flame Surge. What Flame Surge does is hits ignited enemies and then puts Burning Ground. So it's basically a 25% more multiplier. Then we have Wave of Conviction, Ignite Proliferation, Combustion, Unbound Ailments, and Inspiration. Now, if you're going to use Eldritch Battery, Inspiration will not work because you're spending Energy Shield, not mana. So you will not be getting the stacks from this. So replace that with Cruelty or increased burning damage. The overall playstyle is basically Shield Charge around, cast Elemental Weakness, Wave of Conviction them. If they're still alive, then use a Flame Surge on them. And then for bosses, basically do that combo and then hit them with a Evolve Flame Blast with a second Flame Surge. So pretty straightforward most of the time, and especially as you get more damage, you won't even have to do Elemental Weakness, and you'll just be shield charging around. And actually in lower tier maps, shield charge on its own is enough to clear with Ignites and Ignite Proliferation. Let's take a look at the gear and the character. So we are using a level 83 tree. Yeah, I'm level 91. The only thing you get per level is more life, so we actually will have like 200 less life. And I have these 8 passive skill trees. So I'm using this jewel right here to get me convert into Dex to meet the requirement for Grace. If you want to run a different aura, let's say you just want to say, you know what, I don't think I need Grace. I'm playing softcore, I want more damage. You just permanently run Malevolence, or you could run Hatred and then use a temporary Malevolence, which we'll get into in a second. Other than that, we're using Ignite that we're grabbing first, then Shaper of Storms, then Mastermind of Discord, and then finally Heart of Destruction here. Now, because of gear pieces such as this that has spell suppression, a little bit of spell suppression here, we're able to get to the point where we're at 100% spell suppression despite losing this node over here. And that's partially because there's 8% spell suppression over here that we can pick up. So if this wheel plus that, if you don't want to invest this heavily into spell suppression like your shield and your boots, and you just want to go with this helm, these nodes, and this spell suppression, then you can grab the new node that's going to be here. And what it's going to be is your spell suppression chance is lucky, and it's going to get you pretty close to 100%. Not quite 100%, but pretty close. Pretty close. So gear-wise, we're using Obliteration Wand, and this thing last league was like 13C on the first day. It went up rapidly. I bought my first one for 3C, and then it went to 13. But you could just use Chaos Patterns to do that. What it does is it makes things explode for Chaos damage. So you kill something, it explodes for 1/4 of their life as Chaos damage. And then we have this Shaper of Flames, which say hits always ignite, all damage can ignite. So what that does is makes the Chaos damage from the explosion ignite. Then we have this ring here, Barracks Respite. It says when you kill an ignited enemy, inflict an equivalent ignite on each nearby enemy. Now this is different from Ignite Proliferation. Ignite Proliferation happens on the ignite. This only happens when you kill an ignited enemy. But if you kill 2 ignited enemies in a group with an obliteration, or they're already ignited and then the obliteration hits, then it's going to still kind of function the same as Ignite Prolif. And this is a 20 base radius. Now you can get there's 2 other sources of actual Ignite Proliferation that aren't the gem. We do have this baked in, so it's not even necessary because Wave of Conviction does have the Ignite Proliferation support of 20. And the ways are an implicit on gloves that you can get from Eldritch currency, and then there's a medium cluster jewel that gives a 15 radius. Now later in the build, I'm going to be going with the medium cluster jewel because I found it too hard to get to 15 on the gloves. You can get a lower radius one, but it makes a difference when you're really stacking AoE. Then we're using this helm, Alevor. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it. But the nice thing about it gives spell suppression and then the recover life when you suppress spell damage. And if I hold Alt here, it goes up to 200. Now we also have a node on the tree here that gives 50 energy shield when you suppress spell damage. So we're actually gaining like 220 combined health and energy shield whenever we're suppressing. And spell suppression already halves the damage that you take from a spell. So any of those nasty bosses that are dealing spells to you, you're going to half the damage, and then you're going to recover life. So if it's, let's say they do 400 damage, it's going to half that to 200, and then you're going to gain this back, and you could just infinitely tank it. Makes bosses super easy, and overall, just having this go off randomly in the map is going to keep you topped off. Because what this build struggles with especially early on when you don't have enough damage, is in the recovery area, which we're relying on vitality and we're relying on a flask as needed to return our life, and then this adds that extra layer. So if you're dying on this build, you can also add in some of these recoup nodes, like there's this. So for 3 points here, you can get 30% recoup, which means you'll get 30% of the damage that you took back. So it is something to consider. Eventually, in the later versions, what we'll have is percent life on kill. And that's a very strong thing. We can get that either from a medium cluster jewel, or we can get it from our flask called Cinder Swallow. And I recommend getting both of those sources. It'll keep you topped off in between packs. A lot of the times when people are dying, it's because they don't get back to full health before they go into the next pack, and they would have survived if they were already at full health. Then we have these gloves here, Vol Karas, and what this does is give us increased level of our Vol skill gems, and we're using that to push Flame Blast to level 25 to do more damage. And the reason why we're using this is it gains more damage with ailments for each stage and more spell damage with each stage. So it's going to do bigger base hits with bigger ignites as it goes down. Okay. So shield, this is just spell suppression, some resist and some life. Here's a ring, it just has a bunch of resists on it. This just has stats because you need 155 strength and dexterity in order to be able to run determination and grace at a high level. Then these boots, they just have movement speed, a little bit of resist, and some spell suppression. And then Bisco's Leash, you don't have to go with this. I like it because it gives us a little bit of rarity with Rampage and a little bit of quantity. But more importantly, you gain increased damage from Rampage, and you also gain increased movement speed. So it helps us clear quicker, move around quicker, which is one of the bottlenecks. Then for Flask, we need to have some source of removing corrupting blood. I like any of these flasks that are instant recovery when on low life. So basically, I will let myself go down to low life, hit the flask, and then I'll just be completely topped off. Then we have an auto flask that has some movement speed and onslaught. Another flask that has movement speed. Now, the secondary, I actually want immunity, not this what I have here. Unfortunately, I couldn't get it, and I just grabbed a flask out of my stash here in standard. And then this one is going to give armor and increased percent of armor, and then evasion and increased percent of evasion. There are 5 flasks that actually impact Wave of Conviction, which is one of the selling points of the build because it's physical and it has multiple tags. So this will give Fizz as extra cold. This gives ignited enemies take increased damage. And see, this has recover 3% life when you kill an enemy on it, and reduce mana cost, which is going to help us squeeze in the Malevolence aura, but we'll talk about that in a second. And then this gives Fizz as extra chaos and Elemental as extra chaos. This will give people on Consecrated Ground take increased damage and some crit to help you consistently proc Elemental Overload. And then this gives Unholy Might. Unholy Might makes it so you give 30% Fizz as extra chaos. Now let's talk about the additional curse, Herald of Ash, Malevolence, etc., etc. So in order to be able to get an extra curse, you basically need this Whispers of Doom, which you could get either by anointing it or you could spend the points. On other character, we could just pick up the points. However, we were out of skill slots, so you'd have to use a control skill to cast it. And I know people are going to go, oh, that's too many skills. So that's why I left it out, just to show that you don't actually need it to clear tier 16 maps. There is a ring that you can get that automatically applies a low level flammability, but you want the high level flammability eventually. Part of that's because you get increased duration of ignite on cursed enemies as part of the quality. Then for Herald of Ash, in order to get Herald of Ash into the build, I either had to use this 7% increased mana reservation efficiency ×2, one with an essence and one with the implicit, or I had to use a corruption that had socketed skill gems, get 90% cost and reservation multiplier. And that's because I still relied on mana. Now you can see here that I only have on this is my endgame setup, I only have 38 mana here. So how am I able to cast this Malevolence? Well, I have Malevolence with Divergent Inspiration and Divergent Divine Blessing. Divergent Inspiration gives extra reduced mana cost. So I have 44% reduced mana cost from here. Then some of the jewels that I'm using have reduced mana cost of skills, like that one. And then my Cinder Swallow Flask has 25%. But you can't stack this multiple times on flasks. Only one flask will apply. When I hit my flask here, you can see that it's actually free because I also have this 10% reduced mana cost of skills. Now, one of the other reasons why I only have this 38 mana unreserved is because they removed that Vitality has 100% increased mana reservation efficiency, making me have to, in my endgame build, grab this mana, and then reduced, or in order to actually be able to squeeze this in now, plus use the helm. So what I might end up doing instead is using Eldritch Battery. And I can actually just lower my Vitality because it does flat, and I no longer have that 100% increased reservation efficiency. So I can lower it to like level 16, and then I can grab these 3 nodes plus the new node that they put in for the Mana Mastery to do the reduced mana increased mana reservation efficiency. And without the helm, I should be able to put in Herald of Ash, but I'll be down to like 2 mana. Then what you could do is grab Eldritch Battery here. It's going to make your energy shield go from over here, protecting your life, to go over here, protecting your mana. Now, if you don't use any mana for a period of time, it'll fully recover, just like energy shield normally would, instead of on the life. So you probably want to set up your movement skills to still use life tap. It's like Flame Dash and Shield Charge, so it doesn't interrupt it. But I probably will have to go with this option, otherwise it's going to require too much gear. Now we're also recovering energy shield whenever we suppress spell damage, which is very nice because that's going to help make sure that we don't run out of the mana. So that is another option. Now, if you do that though, then inspiration support doesn't actually trigger because you have to actually spend mana. And instead of spending mana, you're spending energy shield. So then you're going to have to replace this with some other support. Now, earlier I mentioned about the flexibility of Wave of Conviction and the tags. So what does that mean? Wave of Conviction has Fire, Lightning, Spell, AoE, Duration, Physical. That means you can have a +1 physical spell and it'll work, or you can have +1 lightning or +1 fire. All that will work. Also, you can have a couple of different corruptions. You could have increased AoE and increased duration. So it also frees up for the severe corruption like this. This is the type of scepters that you might want for your swap. And like I mentioned, if Crucible actually has the Profane Bloom effect on scepters, then you're going to just run around with a scepter. You're probably going to want one like this. Now I want to quickly show you ring upgrades. So this is a really good ring. It covers things in ash when you ignite them. And since we're igniting all the time, it makes them have 20% less movement speed, and they take 20% increased fire damage. Highly recommend that. Plus, it gives increased duration of ailments on enemies, which is nice to counteract this thing. Now, Replica Emberwake, it reduces the ignite duration, but it makes it tick faster. So it's a double whammy on your ignite, because first it reduces it, and then when it ticks faster, it's shorter. Now, unless you counteract this in some way, shape, or form, what's going to happen is your Profane Bloom explosions are going to go so quick that they just never tick, and then you're not getting the ignite portion of the combo for the proliferation, and it won't work. It's just not going to function to chain cascade. So what you need to do is come over here and swap these from this fire damage over time multiplier into this increased duration of ignite. And then we have some increased duration over here as well. You can pick it up on jewels, or there's this node down here that you could pick up for the increased duration. Other than that, duration's pretty hard to come by. Now we do have Awaken Unbound Ailments, which does counteract it some on the Wave of Conviction itself, but this Awaken Unbound Ailments doesn't actually counteract the Profane Bloom part because it's not a support that's hitting it. Another way to scale the damage is by scaling effective non-damaging ailments or shock effect. So because of this, all damage can shock, and we get a guaranteed 15%. That means that if we increase it by 200 and something percent, we'll get 50% shocks all the time. Now, part of Awaken Unbound Ailments is this gives 69% increased effect. You can get some effect right here. They had a mastery that they're removing that had 40. The only other effect really then is over here, which is 20. And then you can get on gear on the boots and the amulet 30. And there's an alternate quality burning damage support, which gives you quality 2% per one quality of effective non-damaging ailments. And then I used a corruption here to get the remaining shock effect on my helm. Now, in the absolute endgame, I intend now in 3.21 to add an Animate Guardian to the build because I can get minus resists, increased effective curses, and then we're going to lower their resists. And if we push them to negative, this 50% increase fire and cold actually multiplies with the negative. Now, if you want to know more about this endgame setup that I ran last league and how it functions, I just made a video about the changes to the build for the upcoming patch, and then you could check out my previous build guide from 3.20 that had my setup in it for Sanctum League. Now let's talk about leveling. So what's provided is also a separate POB that has all the leveling with some useful notes in it. Now, one of the main changes is they removed the recipe to add flat damage to wands, so you're not able to craft them in Act 1, 2, 3. But instead, the league mechanic is supposed to give flat damage, and then they also changed how wands work, where they have implicits that essentially do what the pattern did. So it's going to be more important to actually probably do some early essences, slam them onto wands with the prefixes, and then do the league mechanic to get your flat damage. Wave of Conviction is exceptional because it has a 330% increased effectiveness is added. So that's going to really carry the build through the whole axe, if you can get some of that. So there's these notes that you can go through. It tells you when you get certain gems that you want. I essentially level with Frostbolt and Stormblast Mine. Then I like to add in Stormbrand for a little bit. And then I switch into basically Wave of Conviction. And I basically did Wave of Conviction with Stormbrand to level last league. And I like that. Now, racers, they usually use Armageddon Brand and Cremation, but that requires you to have Desecrate. It requires a bunch of other little active things, and I like to level with the skill that I'm playing, so it's up to you what you want to do. I just thought I'd throw that out there. I did put in the notes what you should have with Armageddon Brand, and then Cremation and Desecrate here, if you want to actually go with that setup. And then I have listed here all the different gems that you probably want to support in order for Wave of Conviction. Now I went with Determination, Herald of Ash, and Vitality, which I highly recommend. In my late one, of course, it's Grace instead. It's up to you what you want to do. You also could use Hatred, which would increase the base hit of Wave of Conviction, but not the dot part. Malevolence to increase the dot part. Or you can go with Herald of Purity, which is going to increase the base damage of the Wave of Conviction. Entirely up to you, but I recommend you're using some amount of auras to buff your damage, and probably Elemental Weakness. Now here I went with Elemental Weakness, Flammability, Arcanist Brand, Flame Surge, but it takes too long to cast all those. But you can combo two of them if you want to combine it. But that would require you picking up the extra curse if you want to run two curses early. Entirely up to you if you want to do this. For items, I recommend that you grab a life flask that is immune to bleeding. So when you see that you're bleeding, you cast your life flask and then it's going to make you immune. Same with corrupting blood, because corrupting blood in the axe, in the later axe, is going to kill you if you don't have this. I recommend having a flask that gives you immune to freeze and chill, at least until you get the Soul of the Brine King that gives you 100% chance to avoid being frozen, and I usually run that. And then I usually like to run the less ignite duration and unaffected by burning ground. Burning ground is so annoying. And then I killed all the bandits, by the way. But you can see here in the level tree, it goes through all the different little configurations as you go. So you can follow this. And then for the items, I just have text here. So here's all the different properties that are useful to you that you can get on the scepters. Now, if you're going to dual wield scepters, you would use Leap Slam with probably Frostblink or Leap Slam with Flame Dash. It's up to you. Or you can go with a scepter and a shield, and then you'd use Shield Charge and Flame Dash. Then most of the gear is just life and resist, life, resist, resist. With the exception of the boots, I recommend at least 25% movement speed, then life, and then resist. You want life and stats probably on your amulet, and then just life and res here, life and res, and between all that, you should be able to cap res, and then you could go for those uniques that I have in the other POB that is also included. Just looking at the final tree here, the order of the ascendancies is the Shaper of Flames, which makes everything ignite, then everything shock, then Mastermind of Discord, which helps your mana regen, but it also gives you more exposure. That's the minus res. And then lastly, we grab Heart of Destruction. This gives you increased area of effect, except for on bosses. It gives you more damage on the bosses. Increased area of effect is helpful for making your Wave of Conviction travel quicker. And then it's also helpful for your Chain Cascades on your Obliteration Wand and your Fire Prolif. If you found this video helpful, make sure that you're liking the video. Now, I will be playing this and I will be giving updates of what I'm doing with the build. If you want those, to make sure that you don't miss it, make sure that you subscribe to the channel. Now, if you need additional help, we do have a Discord and the link is in the description where you can come and ask questions. We have a chill group there, no elitists. So you're welcome to join if you're not going to be elitist and be a jerk. Lastly, I've started a channel to teach coding. So if you'd like to learn to code from me, check that out. The link's in the description.